What kind of man smiles after hearing the one secret that ended another woman's marriage? The kerosene lamp hissed as the Kansas wind rattled the kitchen window. Henry stood dripping cold water onto the floor after saving a struggling calf. Cora twisted her apron until her knuckles turned white. "I can't have children," she whispered. He looked at her and smiled. "Why?" "Stay with us and tell us what you think in the comments." The south wind struck the ranch house hard enough to shake the kitchen window in its frame. Henry Coker stood at the wash basin with his sleeves rolled past his elbows, cold water running over his hands. Mud darkened the knees of his trousers. A streak of straw clung to one shoulder. He had spent most of the evening in the barn beside a red cow that had struggled too long with her calf. Cora Wells had watched from the doorway as he worked. He had not shouted. He had not struck the frightened animal when she kicked at him. He had rested one broad hand against her neck and spoken in the same low voice he used with nervous horses and tired people. Now the calf was breathing beneath its mother, and Henry was back inside. Cora stood beside the kitchen table with both fists twisted into the front of her apron. The kerosene lamp hissed between them. Outside, the wind dragged loose grass across the yard. She had practiced the words alone at Martha Bell's boarding house. She had whispered them while folding dresses, while walking the road from Coldwater, while lying awake beneath a patched quilt. They still scraped her throat when they came. Henry, I can't give you children." The water stopped dripping. Henry did not move. Cora searched his face for the first hardening, the tightening of the mouth, the slow withdrawal she knew too well. For one breath, she saw another kitchen in Missouri, and another man turning his chair toward the far end of the table. Then the lamplight blurred, and memory carried her back to the first warm morning she came to Kansas. The stage rolled into Coldwater under a pale spring sky, wheels grinding through dried wagon ruts. Cora stepped down with one worn valise, a sewing basket, and a Bible wrapped in faded brown cloth. Beneath the Bible lay a white infant's cap no larger than her palm. The town was hardly more than a line of board-front buildings facing a wide dirt road. A mercantile stood beside the blacksmith shop. Cattle bawled from pens behind the stage station. Prairie wind moved dust beneath every door. Several people looked her way. Cora had expected that. She had not expected Henry Coker to look so uneasy. He stood near the hitching rail in a clean white shirt that did not quite fit his shoulders. His dark coat had been brushed carefully, though one cuff was frayed. He removed his hat the moment he saw her. "Miss Wells?" His voice was quieter than it had sounded in her imagination. "Yes. I'm Henry Coker." He looked at the valise, then back at her face. "May I carry that?" The question caught her off guard. Most men simply took what they believed belonged within their reach. Cora released the handle slowly. "You may." Henry lifted the valise and walked beside her rather than ahead. He explained that she would stay at Martha Bell's boarding house until they decided whether marriage suited them both. Martha was a widow of 60, with gray hair, a straight back, and no patience for careless talk. "You should see the ranch first," Henry said. "See the work. See if the country agrees with you. And if it does not, then I'll pay your return fare." Cora studied him. He said it as though her choice mattered. That afternoon, he drove her northwest in an open ranch wagon. The road crossed red earth, limestone ridges, and long grass bending beneath the wind. Cottonwoods marked the creek bottoms. Cattle moved across the distant prairie like dark stitches beneath the enormous sky. Henry pointed out Cottonwood Creek, the north pasture, and the ridge where winter storms came down hardest. He spoke of the ranch as something they might tend together. When a wheel dropped sharply into a rut, his arm moved in front of her to keep her from pitching forward. He did not touch her. He only waited until the wagon steadied, then lowered his arm. Behind the seat sat one tin coffee cup, one rolled bed blanket, and a wooden toolbox burned with the initials HC. Coker Ranch was larger than Cora expected. The house stood beneath 3 cottonwoods with a red barn beyond it and a garden gone wild beside the kitchen. Inside, a long table filled the main room, though only one chair showed signs of daily use. Several upstairs doors were closed. Near the stairway, old height marks climbed a narrow doorframe. Cora traced one faded line with her finger. Henry noticed. "The family before me had 5 children," he said. "I thought about sanding those marks away." "Why didn't you?" "A house ought to remember who passed through it." She withdrew her hand. 5 children, 5 marks rising toward the ceiling. Over the following weeks, Cora spent her days at the ranch and returned to Martha's before dusk. She cleared weeds from the garden, repaired the kitchen curtains, and moved flour sacks away from the damp north wall. Henry asked why she planted onions between the bean rows, to keep certain insects away. He nodded as though she had taught him something worth keeping. When ranch hand Jacob Mills questioned why a woman had been checking the feed ledger, Henry placed the account book in front of Cora. She showed them a grain delivery entered twice under 2 different dates. Henry closed the book. "That saves near $12. Jacob shifted his boots. Henry looked at him calmly. "A sound answer doesn't turn foolish because a woman gives it." At the mercantile, Silas Boone was less courteous. He held Cora's order slip between 2 fingers and asked whether Henry had truly allowed her to charge fencing nails and lamp oil to the ranch account. Cora had already begun to step back when Henry entered. He set his ledger on the counter. "Her judgment carries the same weight as mine." Silas muttered something about proper arrangements. Henry did not raise his voice. Ordinary respect ought not require an arrangement. Outside, Cora thanked him. Henry looked almost surprised. "You shouldn't have needed me to say it." That evening, they sat on the ranch porch while the western sky turned copper over the hills. The garden rows lay dark and straight before them. From the kitchen came the faint movement of the curtains Cora had mended. "The place feels different," Henry said. "Different how?" "Less like I'm waiting for winter." He looked toward the house. "It got so quiet here I stopped noticing the quiet." Cora felt the truth rise in her throat. She turned toward him. "Henry, there is something I should have told you." He reached across the space between their chairs and turned her hand palm up in his. His touch was careful, warm, expectant, but not demanding. She thought of Grace. She thought of the doctor removing his spectacles. She thought of Albert Pike moving his plate to the far end of the table. Cora lowered her eyes. "Kansas is beginning to feel less strange," she said instead. Henry did not press her. A few days later, he asked whether she could imagine staying beyond the summer. That night, Cora sat on the edge of Martha Bell's spare bed and unwrapped the white infant's cap. She placed it beside Henry's latest letter. "A home ought to be useful to more than one lonely man," he had written. The cap lay on one side of the quilt. The letter lay on the other. Cora stared at them until the lamp burned low. "I'll tell him soon," she whispered. Outside, a wagon traveled east through the darkness, its wheels fading along the road. The next morning, Henry drove her past the Coldwater schoolhouse just as the door opened, and children came pouring into the sunlight. They spilled into the road with slates under their arms and tin lunch pails knocking against their knees. A small boy lost his hat beneath Henry's wagon. Henry pulled the team to a stop, leaned down, and caught the hat before a wheel reached it. He set it back on the boy's head. "Hold tighter next time." The child grinned and ran after the others. Henry watched them scatter toward waiting wagons and walking mothers. His hands rested loosely on the reins. "A ranch without children is too quiet a thing," he said. Cora's fingers tightened around the parcel of seed in her lap. Henry did not see her face. The children's laughter blurred into rain striking another roof 11 years earlier. Cora had been 18 when she married Albert Pike in Missouri. He was young then, quick to smile, with strong hands and plans larger than the narrow rented house beside the muddy county road. When she told him she was expecting, he carved a cradle from walnut. He spoke of a son who would carry his name. Cora said little, but in the privacy of her heart, she hoped for a daughter. She chose the name Grace before the child ever moved beneath her dress. The birth came during a hard storm. Rain turned the road to deep mud. The doctor could not get through. A tired midwife stayed all night while Albert walked between the bedroom and the porch, opening the door again and again to look for a lantern that never appeared. Grace was born near dawn. She was tiny and warm and almost silent. Cora held her beneath a clean white cloth and memorized every part of her. The small mouth, the dark hair lying damp against her head, the fingers that curled weakly around Cora's thumb. For 2 days, Grace breathed against her chest. Then the rain stopped. So did Grace. The midwife tried to comfort her by saying the baby had been too small to understand much of the world. Cora held the white cloth tighter. She knew my voice. Dr. Nathan Mercer arrived when the road became passable. He was an older man who removed his hat before entering the room and spoke to Cora rather than over her. Weeks later, he returned. He sat beside the bed, took off his spectacles and polished them with a square of linen. "The birth caused damage," he said. "It will not mend the way we hoped." Cora waited. Another pregnancy would be unlikely. It could also cost you your life. Albert stood in the doorway. The doctor's voice softened. "I would be doing you no kindness by giving you hope I do not believe is there." Cora heard only the words that followed. "Shh, you will not carry another child." She was 19 years old. Albert said nothing. At first, he seemed only stunned. He repaired the walnut cradle and carried it into the loft. Then he began staying out later. At church, he watched fathers lift children into wagons. At supper, he stared at the wall. When neighbors announced another baby, his jaw tightened. He stopped asking how Cora slept. He began speaking of the farm as something he was building for no one. One evening, she placed his plate beside hers. Albert took it without looking at her and moved to the opposite end of the table. The chair scraped across the floor. No accusation followed. None was needed. After that, Cora set his place far away before he entered the room. The distance became a habit. During a winter visit, a farmer brought his 2 sons to discuss fencing. After they left, Albert stood at the window and watched the boys climb into their father's wagon. "My name ends with me," he said. Cora looked toward the loft. "Grace carried your name." Albert's face went flat. "Grace lived 2 days." Cora did not answer. That night, she hid the infant cap where he would never find it. Albert died 6 years later from a sickness in his lungs. Cora nursed him through the final winter. Near the end, he asked whether she had ever hated him. She folded the cloth on his chest and remained silent. After the funeral, people called her fortunate to be young and free. She did not feel free. She sewed dresses, kept houses, and sat beside sick children when their mothers needed rest. She avoided courtship. She could not bear to watch another man's face change after learning the truth. Then Martha Bell introduced her to Henry Coker through letters carried between churches. Henry wrote about cattle prices, leaking roofs, late frost, and biscuits hard enough to mend fence posts. He never asked whether she could bear children. Cora told him she had lost a baby. She told him her marriage had been unhappy. She did not tell him what Dr. Mercer had said. More than once, she began a letter with the truth. Each time she tore it up before the ink dried. Now, outside the Coldwater schoolhouse, Henry repeated that a ranch ought to have children. Albert's voice seemed to rise beneath his. Cora no longer saw Henry beside her. She saw another long table, another chair being pulled away. "You're pale," Henry said. "Are you feeling poorly?" "The sun is warm. It's barely 9. I did not sleep well." He studied her, but she turned toward the schoolhouse before his concern could undo her. That evening, Cora opened her valise at Martha Bell's boarding house. She folded 2 dresses, her nightclothes, and the shawl she had worn on the stage. The white infant cap went beneath the Bible. Martha appeared in the doorway. "Where are you going?" "East." "Has Henry asked you to leave?" "No." "Has he treated you badly?" Cora shook her head. Martha stepped into the room. "Then what happened?" "He wants something I cannot give." "Did he say that?" "He did not need to." Martha looked at the half-packed valise. "Henry Coker is a grown man. Let him decide what he wants. Do not make the choice for him because another man taught you to expect cruelty." Cora's hands went still. She did not unpack. But she did not close the valise either. It remained open through the night while the lamp burned low beside it. At dawn, wagon wheels stopped outside the boarding house. Henry stood on the porch, holding an official envelope marked with the seal of the Eastern Kansas County Orphan Home. Morning light lay pale across the boarding house steps. Dust clung to his boots, and one rein remained looped around his wrist. He glanced past Cora into the front room, where her open valise sat on the floor beside the stairs. His eyes returned to her. "Were you planning to leave?" Cora tightened her shawl. "I had not decided." Henry looked at the envelope, then slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. "Cottonwood Creek came up in the night. Part of the north fence may be gone." He paused. "I could use your eye out there." It was not a demand. It was an invitation made carefully, as if he understood she might refuse. Cora looked back at the valise. Martha Bell said nothing from the hallway. "I'll get my hat," Cora answered. They rode northwest beneath a sky still heavy from the storm. Water shone in the wagon ruts. The prairie smelled of wet earth and crushed grass. For a mile, Henry spoke only to the horses. At last, Cora nodded toward his coat. "Is the letter bad news?" "Not exactly. You know the place?" "I grew up there." The wagon rolled more slowly. Henry kept his gaze on the road. "I was left there as an infant. No name but Henry. No paper explaining why." Cora waited. There was a tall window facing the wagon road. On visiting days, we washed our faces and sat where families could see us. His mouth tightened slightly. They usually chose babies, sometimes little girls. Boys who smiled easily had a fair chance. "And you?" "I was never much good at smiling for strangers." He had sat beside that window until he was 14. By then, he was tall enough to work and old enough to understand that no wagon was coming for him. A cattleman from farther west took him on for wages and meals. Henry said no more. At Cottonwood Creek, the water had chewed away a stretch of bank beneath the north fence. 3 posts leaned toward the current. Several cattle had crossed into broken country beyond the ridge. Jacob Mills met them on horseback with a coil of rope hanging from his saddle horn. "Found most of them," he said. "One young steer's caught in the brush." Cora studied the fence line. "The bank is giving way farther east, too." Jacob frowned. "I checked that section." "You checked from the road. The water is cutting underneath." Henry looked where she pointed. "Jacob, take 2 men east. Set temporary posts above the wash. I'll handle the steer." Jacob hesitated, then turned his horse. The young animal had wedged itself between a fallen rail and a stand of thorn brush. Its eyes rolled white. Each time Henry stepped closer, it kicked and drove itself deeper. "Rope him," Jacob called from the ridge. Henry shook his head. "He'll break a leg." Rain began again, fine and cold. Henry lowered himself beside the brush. He spoke softly and waited. When the steer stopped fighting long enough to listen, Henry shifted one rail and opened a narrow path. The animal stood trembling. Henry backed away. After several breaths, the steer turned and stumbled free. Cora watched him brush mud from his hands. Fear could not always be dragged into obedience. Sometimes it needed space enough to find its own way out. The rain strengthened before they finished the fence. Henry, Cora, and Jacob took shelter in an abandoned line shack near the creek. The roof leaked in 2 places. A small iron stove smoked until Henry cleared the flue with a length of wire. Cora's skirt was wet to the knee. Henry removed his coat and held it toward her. "You'll be colder. I'm moving around. So am I." She took it. They sat beside the stove and divided 2 cold biscuits from Henry's saddlebag. Rain hammered the roof hard enough to fill the pauses between them. "You keep more land than one man needs," Cora said. "I suppose I do." "And more rooms." Henry stared into the stove. "I always believed the place would be needed." "By whom?" Before he could answer, hoofbeats struck the mud outside. Jacob opened the door and announced that the missing cattle had been found. The question was left between them. Several days later, Cora and Henry planted late beans beside the ranch house. Their fingers worked the same soil, sometimes close enough to touch. Henry cleared his throat. I spoke with Reverend Cole." Cora stopped pressing dirt around a seed. "About what?" "What the church requires if 2 people decide to marry." The prairie seemed to go silent around her. "Before you ask me, there is something." Henry reached out and brushed a streak of soil from her cheek. The touch was brief. Cora forgot the sentence she had practiced. "Did you plant enough corn?" she asked. Henry's hand fell. Likely too much. He did not ask what she had meant to say. That evening, Henry visited Martha Bell without Cora knowing. He stood in her parlor with his hat in both hands. "Is she unhappy here?" Martha poured coffee into 2 china cups. "No. She nearly left. She is afraid." "Of me?" "Not exactly." Henry looked toward the window. "Did someone hurt her?" "That is hers to tell." Martha placed a cup in front of him. "Give her room to choose." Henry nodded. "Waiting is something I know how to do." Silas Boone made waiting harder. At the mercantile, he leaned across the counter while Henry checked a receipt for horseshoe nails. "You'd best get sons under that roof before cattle work bends your back for good. A ranch without blood heirs falls to strangers." Henry folded the receipt once. "Blood has abandoned plenty of children. It is not proof of loyalty." Cora entered as Silas laughed. "How many sons do you expect, Coker?" Silas noticed her and raised his voice. "No man builds that many bedrooms unless he plans to fill them." Cora stopped inside the doorway. Henry turned. "Cora!" She placed her order on the counter and left before he could finish. At the church supper that Sunday, families crowded the plank room beneath smoking lamps. Children ran between benches while women uncovered pies and crockery bowls. A little girl stood beside Cora's chair. "Do you have children?" Her mother pulled her away before Cora answered. Henry returned with 2 plates. He did not ask what had happened. He sat close enough that his shoulder touched hers and placed a biscuit beside her beans. Across the room, Reverend Samuel Cole spoke quietly with him. Cora heard only pieces. 9 years old. Waiting 5 years. Henry folded the orphan home letter and returned it to his coat. Later, beneath a sky flashing with distant lightning, Henry and Cora sat on the ranch porch. "I do not want a housekeeper," he said, "and I do not want a marriage made only because winter is easier with 2 people." Cora looked at him. "I want your judgment here, your laughter when I can earn it, your company at the end of a bad day." His hand rested palm up between them. "Could you love this place enough to stay?" Cora put her hand in his. She could not answer. The next week, Henry repaired the hitching rail outside the schoolhouse. A boy in a coat too thin for the wind lingered after the others had gone. He watched each family wagon disappear. Henry followed the child with his eyes. No child ought to wonder whether someone is coming. Cora heard the ache in his voice. The kinder he was, the more terrible his disappointment would be. That night, Henry opened the orphan home letter alone in the barn. Samuel Reed, 9 years old, resident since 4. Quiet, distrustful, often found near the tall front window. The matron wrote that Samuel no longer approached visiting families because he expected them to choose someone younger. Henry creased the page in his fist. Through the barn door, he could see the ranch house glowing against the dark. Cora moved behind the kitchen curtain. "I cannot decide this alone anymore," he whispered. 2 evenings later, Cora came upon Henry and Reverend Cole near the church gate. "The ranch should belong to children someday," Henry said. "You have waited long enough," the Reverend replied. Cora walked away before Henry added that he first had to learn whether she could want the same kind of family. At Martha's boarding house, she opened the Bible and removed Grace's white cap. She placed it inside her coat. Then she walked alone toward Coker Ranch as evening settled over the prairie. When Cora reached the kitchen, Henry was washing his hands after tending a laboring cow, and she realized there would never be a gentler moment in which to break his heart. The south wind pressed against the ranch house and rattled the window in its frame. Water ran from Henry's fingers into the white basin. His sleeves were rolled above his forearms, and a streak of hay clung to his shoulder. Cora stood beside the table with Grace's cap hidden inside her coat. The kerosene lamp hissed between them. "Henry, I can't give you children." He stopped moving. For one long second, nothing in the room seemed to breathe. Cora watched his face. She waited for the change she remembered from Albert. The tightening mouth, the eyes turning distant, the first cold step backward. Henry dried his hands slowly on a flour sack. Cora could not bear the silence. "I should have told you before I came. I tried to write it, more than once." She pulled the infant cap from her coat and laid it on the table. "My daughter was named Grace. She lived 2 days." Henry looked down at the small white cloth. Cora told him about the storm in Missouri, the midwife, Dr. Nathan Mercer, removing his spectacles, the damage that would not mend, the warning that another pregnancy might take her life. Then she told him about Albert, how he had moved his chair away, how he had spoken of his land as something built for no one, how he had made Grace's short life sound as though it did not count. "I let you believe something that was not true," Cora said. "If you want me gone, I'll leave before morning." She pulled the courtship ring from her finger. It struck the tabletop with a soft, sharp sound. Henry stared at Grace's cap. His eyes filled, and Cora mistook the reason. He turned toward the dark window. That movement nearly undid her. She heard Albert's chair scraping across the old Missouri floor. She saw the open valise waiting at Martha Bell's boarding house. She reached for the ring. Henry turned back. He crossed the kitchen without haste. Cora's fingers had twisted into her apron again. Henry placed his hands over hers and gently separated them. He did not pull her against him. He held her palms open between them. Then he bent and kissed her forehead. Cora's breath caught. There was no pity in it. "I heard you," Henry said, "but you have not heard me. You said the ranch needed children." "It does." Her fingers began to close. Henry held them steady and gave a small, sorrowful smile. "Then we'll love the ones who need us." Cora stared at him. "You understand what I said?" "Yes. I will never bear your child. I never needed a child to carry my blood." Henry pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Listen before you decide whether you still want me." He told her about the orphan home in full. On visiting days, children washed their faces and sat beside the tall front window. Families chose babies, cheerful little girls, and boys young enough to forget where they had come from. Henry had grown older in the same chair. One winter, a wagon stopped and a woman pointed toward the window. For several seconds, Henry believed she had chosen him. She had been pointing at the fair-haired boy behind him. "That was the last day I let myself believe anyone was coming," he said. At 14, He left with mended boots, a spare shirt, and the address of a cattleman who needed labor. Before walking away, he looked back at the window. 3 younger children had already taken the places beside it. He made himself a promise. If he ever owned land, food, and a roof no one could take from him, he would return for the children left waiting there. The long table was built for them, Henry said. The upstairs rooms were kept for them. He took the orphan home letter from his coat and unfolded it. Samuel Reed is 9. He has been there since he was 4. The matron says he stopped coming to the window. Cora looked from the letter to Henry. You were going to bring him here? I wanted to ask whether we might meet him after we married. Why didn't you tell me? Because I feared you might want babies of your own. I feared an older child would feel like less to you. A sound escaped Cora, halfway between a laugh and a sob. They had lived for weeks beneath the same fear, each convinced the truth would send the other away. Relief came, but it brought anger with it. Cora struck the table with the flat of her hand. Why could Albert make me feel ruined when you do not? The lamp flame trembled. Why did I spend 11 years believing my life had ended, because a doctor told me my body could not do one thing? Henry did not defend Albert. He did not offer easy comfort. He let her be angry. At last, Cora unfolded Grace's cap. No child can replace her. I know. I will not build a happy house by pretending she never lived. Henry picked up the cap as carefully as he might have lifted a sleeping bird. Tell me what she looked like. Cora swallowed. She had dark hair, a small mouth, her fingers curled around mine. Henry listened to every word. Grace was your daughter before I ever knew your name, he said. Any child who comes here will know that. Cora covered her eyes. For years, grief had been something she hid inside a Bible. Now it sat beneath the lamplight. Held in Henry's hands, he placed the cap beside the ring. I will not ask you to marry me tonight, he said. Not while you are grateful I did not reject you. Cora lowered her hands. Both will stay here until morning. Then you decide. She slept in the spare room. Henry carried a blanket to the barn loft so no one could question her honor. Neither of them slept much. The house remained quiet, but for the first time the silence did not feel empty. At sunrise, Cora found Henry on a ladder above one of the closed upstairs rooms. He was replacing a strip of warped roofing with a hammer and square nails. The room needs work, he said, whether we use it or not. Cora climbed the first 2 steps and held up the hammer he had left below. Repair the others too. Henry looked down. The ring was back on her finger. Cora met his eyes. And write to Samuel. By noon, Reverend Samuel Cole had begun the guardianship inquiry. By the end of the week, Silas Boone had heard of it. He questioned whether Henry, a former orphan, and Cora, a black widow with no living children, should be trusted with a white Kansas boy. Henry reached for his coat. Cora stopped him with one hand. Our family will not begin with you fighting every foolish man in Coldwater, she said. It will begin with us proving what kind of home we mean to keep. The reply from the orphan home arrived 6 days later. Samuel might be considered. But first, Henry and Cora would have to face a county hearing where Silas Boone intended to challenge them. They married before the hearing, on a clear summer morning in the plank church at Coldwater. Cora wore a dark blue dress she had sewn by lamplight. Martha Bell pinned one small white flower near her collar for Grace. Henry wore the brushed coat he had worn at the stage stop, the one with the frayed cuff he had never managed to hide. Reverend Samuel Cole kept the ceremony simple. Henry and Cora did not promise that sorrow would leave them. They promised to speak truth, keep faith, and make room for whatever the other carried. An empty chair stood in the first row. Henry did not ask why. Afterward, Cora moved permanently to Coker Ranch. Henry entered her name beside his in the ledger. The chair at the far end of the supper table was moved next to his. Together, they opened the upstairs rooms. Dust turned gold in the afternoon light. Henry repaired latches and floorboards. Cora sewed a dark quilt for Samuel and placed a lamp, washstand, and wooden chest in his room. The chest had a working lock. "The key should belong only to him," she said. "A child who has owned nothing ought to control one thing." Henry built shelves and left them empty. They did not guess what Samuel would love. The county hearing was held above the sheriff's office in a room that smelled of paper, dust, and hot pine boards. Sheriff Amos Reed stood near the door. Martha Bell and Reverend Cole sat behind Henry and Cora. Silas Boone took a chair near the magistrate's desk. The magistrate reviewed Henry's acreage, cattle receipts, tax records, and bank account. Then Silas rose. He argued that Samuel should be placed with a family able to give him blood inheritance and social acceptance. He questioned Henry's childhood. He questioned Cora's fitness. At last, he asked whether she had ever raised a child. Cora stood. "I cared for sick children. I buried my daughter. I know love does not promise protection from loss." Silas leaned forward. "Can you bear children now?" Henry began to rise. Cora touched his sleeve. She looked directly at the magistrate. "My body is not on trial here. The question is whether Samuel will be fed, educated, protected, and kept when he becomes difficult." No one moved. "A child does not owe us our blood," she said. "We owe him a door that will still open after he has tested every hinge." Martha Bell lowered her face into her handkerchief. Henry's eyes remained on Cora, filled not with rescue, but pride. When his turn came, Henry told the court what children like Samuel might do. Hide food, lie, break things before those things could be taken away. Test every promise because promises had failed before. "I cannot promise he will be easy," Henry said. "I can promise we will not return him for being wounded." Sheriff Amos Reed confirmed that Henry had never failed a debt, contract, or neighbor who depended upon him. The magistrate granted 6 months of temporary guardianship. Outside, Silas said a boy without Coker blood would never truly inherit the ranch. Henry put on his hat. Land can be given by deed. Belonging has to be given every day. Cora walked past Silas without lowering her eyes. Before dawn 2 mornings later, she and Henry left in the ranch wagon. The road east crossed open prairie, river bottoms, and deep wheel ruts hardened by summer traffic. At night, they camped beneath cottonwoods and drank coffee from tin cups. Henry grew quieter as they neared the orphan home. Cora took his hand first. "A wagon can stop," she said, "even if the child no longer comes to the window." The building stood plain beside the road. Children appeared behind the tall front glass. Some watched openly. Others turned away as though they did not care. Henry remained seated for a long moment. Then he climbed down. The matron told them Samuel no longer waited near the window. On visiting days, he stayed in the rear schoolroom repairing books. They found him at a scarred table with a split-backed reader, a brush, and a pot of glue. He had uneven dark hair and a guarded expression older than 9. Without looking up, he asked, "Which child did you choose?" Cora answered, "We came to meet Samuel Reed." His hand stopped. "There's another Samuel." "No," Henry said, "there isn't." Samuel looked between them. "You know how old I am?" "Yes." He began listing his faults before they could discover them. He disliked loud rooms. He hid food. He could not sleep behind locked doors. He once struck a boy who touched his belongings. Henry nodded. "Those are things we can understand." "Why didn't you choose a baby?" Cora lowered herself several feet away, leaving space between them. "Because we did not drive all this way looking for a baby." Samuel's face did not soften. "What happens when you get tired of me?" Henry struggled to answer. Cora did not. Then we will have failed you. You will not have failed us. Samuel looked at Henry. Henry told him about the ranch, the cattle, and a young horse that disliked strangers. He explained that Samuel did not have to call either of them mother or father. Samuel agreed only to visit for 6 months. He carried one small bundle to the wagon. Before climbing in, he looked toward the tall window where other children stood behind the glass. Henry looked too. Cora rested a hand on his arm. We begin with the child beside us. The wagon rolled west. Samuel sat stiffly in the back and did not wave. After several miles, he asked whether the ranch truly had cattle. It was the first question that assumed he might reach it. At Cora Ranch, Samuel kept his boots beside the bed. He hid biscuits beneath the mattress and lied when he broke a blue plate. Cora placed a covered tin in his room. It will be filled every morning. When they swept the broken plate together, she said, plates are easier to replace than people. He watched her face for the punishment that never came. The young horse in the corral shied whenever Samuel approached. One morning he threw down the brush. It doesn't want me either. Henry leaned against the fence. Frightened creatures often strike before they can be left. He taught Samuel to stand still and let the horse choose the distance. Days later, the animal took oats from Samuel's palm. By autumn, Samuel rose before breakfast to brush it. One afternoon, he found Grace's infant cap in the wooden box on the mantel. He thought Henry and Cora were expecting a baby. Cora told him about Grace. Do you still love somebody who is gone? He asked. Love does not obey absence. Would loving me make you love her less? No, Samuel considered that. Later, he carved Grace into a piece of cottonwood and placed it beneath the tree near the porch. A sister ought to have a place by the house, he said. Winter came early. During the first hard snow, Samuel overheard Henry and Cora discussing the final adoption papers. Believing they meant to send him away, he took his bundle and hid inside the ranch wagon. Henry climbed into the wagon but did not drag him out. He unfolded the adoption petition, already signed. Cora placed the room key in Samuel's hand. The key was never temporary. At the final hearing, the magistrate approved the adoption. Samuel chose to keep Reed as his middle name and take Coker as his family name. He signed beneath Henry and Cora in a shaking hand. Outside, he climbed into the wagon between them. Years passed. Another bed went upstairs. 2 brothers arrived together because Cora refused to separate them. An older girl taught younger children beside the kitchen stove. Boots multiplied near the door. Henry lengthened the supper table. Cora added names and heights to the old doorframe. Grace's name remained first in the family Bible. One evening, a traveling preacher arrived while supper was being served. Laughter and scraping chairs could be heard from the yard. The preacher looked around the crowded table. How many belong to you? Henry glanced toward Cora. She was passing biscuits while Samuel helped a smaller child fasten a torn sleeve. Henry smiled. Everyone who needed to. Later, beneath the Kansas stars, Cora and Henry sat together on the porch. The crowded house glowed behind them. Voices moved through the open window. Cora remembered the night she had stood beneath the kerosene lamp with her hands twisted in her apron, waiting for love to turn cold. Henry reached across the space between their chairs and opened his hand. Cora placed hers inside it. This time she did not brace for him to let go. Far to the east, children still watched the wagon road from an orphan home window. At Coker Ranch, the wagon stood ready beneath the cottonwoods. Maybe that's the image that stays with you long after the story ends, not because every road became easy, but because someone finally chose to keep driving toward those who had almost stopped hoping. If you've ever carried words that made you feel broken, if you've ever believed one painful season had already decided the rest of your life, perhaps you understand what Cora and Henry discovered. The deepest families are not always the ones we are born into. Sometimes they are built one promise, one patient morning, and one open door at a time. Grace was never forgotten. Samuel was never expected to earn his place. Love simply made room for them both. I like to imagine that every time Henry hitched those horses, he remembered the little boy who once watched the road from an orphan home window. And every time Cora heard children laughing through the house, she knew that losing Grace had never erased her from the story. It had only taught them to recognize every lonely heart still waiting to be seen. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know what touched you most. Was it Cora's courage to tell the truth, Henry's quiet promise, or Samuel's first step toward trusting again? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone else may need to read them today. And if stories of hope, enduring love, healing hearts, and second chances feel like coming home, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next trail.